Welcome everybody. I'd like to welcome you tonight to the webinar by Unit Gallery, Song of Songs talk with Richard Shillitoe. So how does this exhibition come about? Well, Song of Songs, representation of the self, spirituality and sense of self, and the state of minds from modernity to the digital age really explores the conversation between artists, Ithell Colguhoun, and the state of mind and looking at society today. Ithell Colguhoun, which Richard Shillitoe will explain tonight, is a surrealist artist. She's very much at the center of the exhibition, that her work as a polymath, a poet, an occultist, a painter, opens up all these doors of perception of reality. From surrealism to the digital age, her work opens up how these artists can connect and exchange very much a conversation of where we are in society coming out of lockdown. This exhibition deals with many contemporary artists and actually questions and actually shows the potentials of world making, or the notion of art of transformation. The artists include Stacey Gillian Abi, Jessica Harrison, Elaine Hui, Bartika, Linda, Richard Malone, Jessie Moschran, Suchitra Matai, Claire Ormerod, Matthew Stone, Grace Weir and Anna Wynand. The exhibition focuses on the states of mind potentials using painting, using VR commissions, embroidery, sculpture, drawing. It is a celebration of all the mediums of art as we trace the journey from surrealism to now. Ultimately, the exhibition is a celebration of what it means to be human in a climate of change and chaos, and how we can look forward to the notion of spirituality, the body, and an act of transformation. And I would like to introduce Richard Shillitoe, who Richard very much has the legacy of Ithell behind him, that he is a tireless supporter of her work, has kind of very much elevated her practice. She's been very much little known. She has shown in exhibitions, but to the wider, greater canon, Richard really uplifts her practice, also has protected her archive, a webmaster, a biographer, all the things. So I have to say thank you, Richard, for very much bringing Ithell to our attention in the museum world, in the poetry world, in books, but to the greater consciousness of the art practice. I really much thank you for your generosity in lending some of the works tonight, but also very much your deep knowledge. So I'm going to pass you to Richard, who's going to do a deep dive into Ithell's work, and then I'll go into the contemporary artists, and then we'll have a Q&A. So over to you, Richard.
And the display of paintings by Colquhoun is actually the most comprehensive exhibition of important paintings by her in London since 1977, so it's well overdue. All of Colquhoun's creative activity, writing and painting, took place alongside her endless search for spiritual enlightenment. This was carried out through private study, meditation, and membership of numerous societies and groups. She is generally thought of as an occultist, that is, someone who practices ceremonial or practical magic, such as the performance of rituals to contact angels and spirits. That is true, but it is only one part of the story. So let's look at some of the paintings in the exhibition and see what we can discover. This is one of Colquhoun's finest paintings immediately post-Slade, a time when she was still interested in figure compositions, always finding her subjects in biblical or classical sources. It's not been exhibited in in public, since 1976, so it's wonderful to have it on view. The Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon, is a chapter in the Old Testament, famous for its erotic rather than for its theological content. And the painting is a tour de force of sensuality. From the flagon of wine, the luscious ripe fruit, the sexy red shoes, the pink gems in the necklace, the whole thing oozes opulence from every brushstroke.
Welcome everybody. I'd like to welcome you tonight to the webinar by Unit Gallery, Song of Songs talk with Richard Shillitoe. First, I'd like to thank Joe and Johnny, Francesca, Anna, and also Katerina for tonight's webinar, which discusses the work of Ithell Colguhoun and the contemporary artists in Song of Songs. So how does this exhibition come about? Was Song of Songs representation of the self, spirituality and sense of self, and the state of minds from modernity to the digital age really explores the conversation between artists, Ithell Colguhoun, and the state of mind and looking at society today. This exhibition came about by the invitation from the Unit Gallery to show an exhibition that reflected contemporary society and concerns. And one of those, as we come up post-COVID and post-lockdown, is the chaos and conflict that we all kind of inhabited in those worlds. And during lockdown, I was inspired by the artist Ithell Colguhoun. Ithell Colguhoun, which Richard Shillitoe will explain tonight, is a surrealist artist. She's very much at the center of the exhibition, that her work as a polymath, a poet, an occultist, a painter, opens up all these doors of perception of reality. From surrealism to the digital age, her work opens up how these artists can connect and exchange very much a conversation of where we are in society coming out of lockdown. And it's interesting, this exhibition as well, is support creativity through mental health and through actually ways forward, through resilience, through the notion of the body, and a platform to rediscovering the female artist in the new canon of art history. This exhibition deals with many contemporary artists and actually questions and actually shows the potentials of world making, or the notion of art of transformation. The artists include Stacey Gillian Abi, Jessica Harrison, Elaine Hui, Bartika, Linda, Richard Malone, Jessie Moschran, Suchitra Matai, Claire Ormerod, Matthew Stone, Grace Weir and Anna Wynant. The exhibition focuses on the states of mind potentials using painting, using VR commissions, embroidery, sculpture, drawing. It is a celebration of all the mediums of art as we trace the journey from surrealism to now. Ultimately, the exhibition is a celebration of what it means to be human in a climate of change and chaos, and how we can look forward to the notion of spirituality, the body, and an act of transformation. So tonight's exhibition, which we look at through with Unit here, we've got on the slides, will also be questioning Ithell herself as the mothership of this exhibition, who very much inspires and has the conversations with these artists. And I would like to introduce Richard Shillitoe, who Richard very much has the legacy of Ithell behind him, that he is a tireless supporter of her work, has kind of very much elevated her practice. She's been very much little known. She has shown in exhibitions, but to the wider, greater canon, Richard really uplifts her practice, also has protected her archive, a webmaster, a biographer, all the things. So I have to say thank you, Richard, for very much bringing Ithell to our attention in the museum world, in the poetry world, in books, but to the greater consciousness of the art practice. I really much thank you for your generosity in lending some of the works tonight, but also very much your deep knowledge. So I'm going to pass you to Richard, who's going to do a deep dive into Ithell's work, and then I'll go into the contemporary artists, and then we'll have a Q&A. So over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much. Rachel started by thanking everybody at the Unit Gallery, and so it's my pleasure to thank Rachel for her contribution, starting the whole ball rolling, getting me involved, not taking no for at its face value. And so here we are today, and I'm very pleased to be here acknowledging all the work that she has done and all the work that the staff have done as well. So I'm going to talk a bit about Colquhoun and then talk about some of the paintings that are on show in the exhibition. And the display of paintings by Colquhoun is actually the most comprehensive exhibition of important paintings by her in London since 1977, so it's well overdue. I'm going to start with some background information about Colquhoun herself. She was born in India in 1906, but spent her childhood on the Isle of Wight in the care of an elderly spinster aunt. Her parents returned to England on her father's retirement from the Indian Civil Service, and Ithell attended Cheltenham Ladies' College before studying at the Slade School of Art in London. Her professor of painting at the Slade described her as one of the most brilliant students they had had. While still a student, she published her first scholarly paper. Its subject was the poetic nature of the language of alchemy. For Colquhoun, writing always went side by side with painting. You can argue that she was more successful as a writer than as an artist during her life. Over the course of her life, she published a Gothic novel, Goose of Hermogenes, a biography of MacGregor Mathers, the occultist, books about Cornwall and Ireland, and 2 booklets of poetry and prose. That was in addition to essays, short stories, poems, book reviews. 2 more novels have been published posthumously, together with a substantial anthology of her shorter writings. The late 1930s and early 40s were largely taken up by a fractious relationship with the Surrealist group in London. As most people probably know, she was expelled from the London group for refusing to compromise her occult activities. A disastrous marriage to a writer and polemicist, Tony Del Renzio, lasted just 3 years. It was not until she moved to Cornwall in the late 1950s that she began to feel a sense of peace and harmony in her life. She settled in a small village within the ancient granite landscape near Penzance. As she once wrote, Cornwall gave her not only a living, but a life worth living. Surrounded by holy wells, wayside crosses, and stone circles, it was a place of intense and ancient spirituality. And she died in Cornwall in 1988. All of Colquhoun's creative activity, writing and painting, took place alongside her endless search for spiritual enlightenment. This was carried out through private study, meditation, and membership of numerous societies and groups. She is generally thought of as an occultist, that is, someone who practices ceremonial or practical magic, such as the performance of rituals to contact angels and spirits. That is true, but it is only one part of the story. Here she is on the left as a druid, taking part in an autumn equinox ceremony on Primrose Hill in London in September 1957. But in addition to druidry, her activities also took in Freemasonry, mystical Christianity, Jewish Kabbalah, and veneration of the Great Mother Goddess. Taken together, they make up a comprehensive mixture of beliefs and practices of East and West, ancient and modern. People sometimes wonder whether Colquhoun was primarily an artist who was also a magician, or primarily a magician who was also an artist. So let's look at some of the paintings in the exhibition and see what we can discover. This is one of Colquhoun's finest paintings immediately post-Slade, a time when she was still interested in figure compositions, always finding her subjects in biblical or classical sources. It's not been exhibited in public since 1976, so it's wonderful to have it on view. The Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon, is a chapter in the Old Testament, famous for its erotic rather than for its theological content. And the painting is a tour de force of sensuality. From the flagon of wine, the luscious ripe fruit, the sexy red shoes, the pink gems in the necklace, the whole thing oozes opulence from every brushstroke. Notice how the spears that support the banner resemble Cupid's arrows. And the sensuality breaks cover at the upper right corner, where the slender spears, juxtaposed with a slit in the tree trunk, provide much more overt male and female sexual symbols. In case you think I'm reading too much into this, we see exactly the same thing nearly 30 years later in the tall, slim painting Stlactite, which hangs nearby. This time, the female symbol is a slit in some rocky cliffs, and a stalagmite provides the male symbol. But tree trunks, spears, caves, and stalactites are more than just symbols. They represent sexuality in action. Colquhoun was an animist. To her, all matter has been created, so that everything, even the apparently inanimate, contains a trace of the creator and must be regarded as living. The phrase Mother Earth is not just a metaphor, it is a literal truth. Being alive, the earth is naturally sexually active, and the shape of natural forms are constant reminders of this. The stalactite, I don't know why she calls it a stalactite, because in fact it's a stalagmite, is a fantasy, but the slit in the rocks is real. It's at a bay near Land's End called Nangizzle, not far from where she lived. Locally, it has the rather poetic name, the Song of the Sea. How many of you, I wonder, can look at any of the old Neolithic standing stones that are everywhere to be found in Cornwall and not imagine that something intimate is taking place between it and Mother Earth? Well, not anymore, you can't, and neither could Colquhoun. This one is Onsen Agnes, one of the Scilly Isles that lie just off the coast of Cornwall. Colquhoun knew it well and incorporated it into one of her more poetic paintings of sexual activity in the natural world. You can see it on the right. Depending on the state of the tide, St. Agnes is one island or two. At low tide, it is one, but at high tide, the rising waters divide it into two smaller land masses. Traditionally, water is regarded as a female element and earth or land as male. The islet on the left is the site of a holy well, shown here above some steps, with water gushing and coalescing into a female form. So this is the female islet. The other islet has the standing stone, so that is the male one. Male and female come together and separate and come together in perpetuity, in rhythm with the ebbing and flowing of the tides. The painting is related to a suite of prose poems, The Myth of Santa Warna. At the climax of the poem, Santa Warna, who's one of the more obscure female Cornish saints, snuggles into the turf of St. Agnes, where she becomes part of the living, breathing landscape. Now this, the Drowned Cathedral, is Colquhoun's largest painting. It takes its title from the piano composition by Claude Debussy, and that's a musical depiction of a legendary cathedral submerged between the water, which mysteriously rises from the waves and into the sparkling light of day, then sinks again into the depths. But Colquhoun's stone temple is real, not legendary. It shows the two stone circles that lie semi or totally submerged on the island of Lannig, which lies just off the coast of Brittany. You can see the coast in the background, and the island just behind Lannig is Gavrinis, which is the site of the most supremely decorated Neolithic tombs in the whole of Europe. It outdoes even Newgrange, if I can say that with Rachel listening in. And previously, these islands were part of the mainland. The conventional explanation for the submergence of the stones is a rise in sea level. But always an independent thinker, Colquhoun wondered whether the Neolithic architects had predicted this change in sea level and had it in mind when they positioned and built the circles. Perhaps, she wrote, the daily immersion of this temple, dedicated to the powers of both sea and earth, was intended by its builders. So once again, we have water and earth, male and female, in close rhythmic action. The idea that women in particular are intimately associated with nature is a recurring one in Colquhoun's works. She frequently declared that at stone circles, holy wells, or sacred streams, spiritual power emerges from the body of Hecate, the great earth goddess. Women, in Colquhoun's view, occupy a privileged position in relation to their closeness to natural forces and natural powers. But with industrialization, we have all become alienated from nature and lost our link with the land. Personally, she felt this alienation very profoundly, and I'm sure this is why, in her will, she divided her copyright between charities that support personal and environmental well-being, including, of course, the Samaritans. On a trip to France in 1939, she was photographed by the American photographer Man Ray. In the light of what I've just been saying about the importance to Colquhoun of sexuality and woman's place in nature, it comes as no surprise that, holding her sheaf of wheat, she has had herself photographed as a modern Demeter or Ceres, the corn goddess who presides over the fruitfulness of the earth. Man Ray, of course, was no stranger to sexual imagery himself. So notice how he contrived to make the slender rod at the lower left point directly at her groin. But his image is more innuendo than sex as a natural force of nature. The most enduring legacy of her visit to France that year was her adoption of automatic methods of painting. By automatic, I mean painting with a complete suspension of conscious control. The surrealists did this in order to tap levels of the mind normally inaccessible to consciousness, which has a series of sensors that filter out anything too raw or threatening. Colquhoun, however, was always clear that for her, the source of her images could equally well be external. Rather than letting her subconscious direct her hand, she understood that she was making herself open to influences from other realms. And, oops, we've missed one. There we go, thank you. There are several paintings in the exhibition that use the automatic technique of decalcomania. Alcove is one. Decalcomania involves spreading oil paint randomly on the board or surface of canvas and then squashing it beneath another board. After separating the two and putting aside the negative, she would add a background and refine the forms. Decalcomania paintings evoke highly physical reactions in many viewers. Looking at the ridges and furrows in the paint, you can almost hear the squishing and sucking sounds made by the viscous paint as the surfaces were pressed together and then parted. Generally, Colquhoun put aside the negative, but very occasionally she worked on them both to produce a pair. Unit Gallery is fortunate to have on show both halves of the alcove pairing. One half seems to be suffused with a warm inner glow, whilst the other is much cooler in tone. Looking at the paintings, many people see sexual couplings taking place on a table or perhaps an altar within a distinctly vulval environment. But the thing about decalcomania is that everybody projects their own interpretations on the ambiguous forms, and everyone's interpretations are likely to be different. Surrealism, alchemy, occultism are all about change. They are methods of bringing about change in oneself, in the natural world, or in one's spirituality. If you're looking for one image that will signify change, it's difficult to do better than a volcano. A volcano shows nature in a moment of dramatic metamorphosis. in which the solid becomes fluid, water turns to steam, rocks become molten, and the world burns. The volcano has been a symbol of alchemical and magical transformation for centuries, not to mention sexual climax. This is Mount Etna in Sicily. It started to erupt in 1971 and continued intermittently for several years. It's an apparently simple painting of two overlapping triangles with tongues of fire in the foreground and clouds of steam in the sky, but it contains a mass of magical symbolism. Fire and water are two of the traditional alchemical elements. The alchemical symbol for the element of fire is a triangle with point uppermost, and a triangle with the point downwards symbolizes water, and we have those here. The horizontal marker that crosses the painting at the place where the triangles intersect divide it into two roughly mirroring halves and suggests the hermetic idea of as above, so below. Occultists look for meaning in the smallest details, and Colquhoun once wrote an essay called Fire and the Pyramid of Flame. In it, she reports that the three angles which make up the triangle of fire each has its own meaning and significance. The left basal angle concerns volcanic fire, which flashes through the abysses of Earth. It is surely significant that she has chosen to highlight this corner of the triangle by overpainting it in a flat colour, and that's where we find her monogram. You will notice that Volcano, like Stlactite and some of the other paintings in the exhibition, is signed not with her name, but with a monogram, the letters S and V inside a circle. It's a tradition in many spiritual organizations for a person to adopt a new name when they achieve a certain status, to symbolize their new spiritual identity and purpose. Most people know Aleister Crowley's magical name was Perdurabo, I shall endure. Similarly, but from a rather different tradition, Joseph Ratzinger rebranded himself as Benedict XVI, when he was elected Pope. When Colquhoun started studying with a magician called Kenneth Grant, she chose as her magical name the Latin phrase Splendidior vitro, more sparkling than crystal, indicating that her personal spiritual quest was for purity and clarity, hence the S and the V. I shall end with two mysteries. The first is who is it? And the second is what is it? This is undoubtedly a painting by Colquhoun, but the mystery here is, who is the sitter? During her life, at no time did she ever refer to it as anything other than head. It is only latterly that it has attracted the title of self-portrait. It certainly looks a bit like her. And this is undoubtedly a self-portrait, painted only a couple of years later, and now in the V&A. On the other hand, it also looks very much like this, a Slade model from the life class, who is recognizable from several other drawings. It even has the same wooden paneling. So, irrespective of whether it's a self-portrait or a full-length painting of a nude model, which she has subsequently cut down, we can enjoy it for what it is, a young artist displaying her developing skills. Finally, what was she thinking of when she made this collage? It's one of a series of collages, each called Permutation. They all consist of colored discs of paper fixed to a background in a grid of rows and columns. Try as I might, I have not been able to identify a pattern for the colors or the color changes in any of the series. I can't believe they are truly abstract geometrical patterns because Colquhoun is never abstract. Whenever she seems to be non-representational, the colours invariably have a clear occult meaning, except here. However, around the time she was making the Permutation series, as part of her magical studies, she was also making what are called Telismatic Images. Telismatic simply means something that has magical power, like a talisman. This one is a telismatic image of the well-known Tree of Life diagram. Colquhoun used telismatic images to help her visualize invisible powers and forces. In ceremonial magic, based on the Kabbalah, all the letters of the Hebrew alphabet are assigned a color. So if you spell out the name of a spirit or an angel, you can convert the name into its component colors, which you can then superimpose onto each other, reducing the name to concentric multicolored rings. Here, the colored rings spell out the names of the spheres of the Tree of Life. We have plenty of concentric colored rings in Permutation, but whether they contain a meaning that I have not yet uncovered, who knows? Back to my original question, was she artist or was she magician? Having looked at the paintings, I hope you will agree that the question is a false one. Artist or magician? It is a distinction without a difference. Thank you for listening.
Richard, thank you for that enlightened and descriptive view of Ithell, but also full of her personality. We get a sense of her, and she was a very complex character and touched on many other themes that go into, such as time, potentials of space, and spirituality and ritual. So it'd be good to kind of tease these out now. We're going to go into a contemporary artist. As we've been in conversation with Ithell and with Richard, I'm going to expand now to the artists on show in Song of Songs, and Ithell's work as a portal to the potentialities, and very much so talk about their work, but why it connects to Ithell and connects to this exhibition and the theme, the Song of Songs, and states of mind, sense of self, and as we trace it from the digital to the digital age. So we'll start first with Linda. And Linda, who very much known as Linda Sterling, but Linda, has been shown many times alongside Ithell Colguhoun in exhibitions. But why for this exhibition? Linda is a radical feminist, and her work is about montage, using domestic pieces in very much recontextualizing domestic to the extraordinary, to re-look at roles and power and feminism, and actually almost have a baton of surrealism to now, that Ithell had questioning kind of surrealism and place in the world with nature and with the female form. I think very much Linda carries that baton. And here we have the goddess who lives in the mind, which is a light box very much inside but outside the gallery, so inhabiting two spaces, where we see a woman who looks like a heroine from the 1950s or 60s on the train track about to be mowed down. We have in front of her a massive stargazer, a natural, almost surreal, super large stargazer flower, showing a kind of feminine, divine, almost kind of a sense of strength by placing this surreal collage within that we have a sense of landscape of worship, but also of changing and pivoting the power play. And I think Linda's work very much does that on many levels, as Linda also celebrates the notion of ritual, collage, and the notion of actually the essence of nature and the essence of everyday, making it extraordinary, and actually having that radical feminism, that punk sensibility for us to actually connect and celebrate in the 21st century. So this is a really powerful work that I felt really connected to Ithell, and also had a sense of joy about it, wonderment, but a sense of strength as we explore the world that Linda is offering us to walk into. And very much, there's a few of the works alongside in the show that kind of are connected to Ithell's kind of stain automatism techniques as well. So there is a very much a tightly woven web between Linda and Ithell. So from Linda now, I want to explain that this is called the goddess that lives in the mind, that the potentials of the mind are something that I really wanted to bring out within the exhibition. So if we look at Elaine Hui's work, so Elaine Hui's birth body boundary, why I wanted to bring this into, there's a quote by Ithell, and Richard will tell me if I'm right or wrong at this, where she said to one of her paintings, it was about the potentials of the world, inhabited and uninhabited. So to me, having Elaine Hui as a digital artist, and Elaine Hui's work, she's an Irish artist who's a pioneer in virtual reality and the notion of the human condition, was a great way to explore the potentials of the mind in the actual digital space. So we're going from the surreal painting to the actual digital world. And Elaine Hui's work, I want to thank UNIT. This is a new commission. So it's very exciting to have this. You can kind of put your headset on and your gloves and you enter the world that Elaine has created of birth body boundary, which is a celebration of transmutation. As you go in as a figure, it's about dancing, connecting to one of Ithell's work, Dancing Mine Opals. And actually you enter terrain that can be gender fluid. It's a terrain that, who are we? Are we the figure in that digital world? Or is the landscape more important? What is the transmutations as we go into this space, and how do we have this celebratory dance within inside it, and this abstract notion of the female body that actually is based on landscapes. So this work was very much a celebratory VR work, but also connected to the notions of boundaries, of birthing a new life, birthing potentials, but actually claiming a space of transformation in the digital world, which I think Ithell would have been great to have her views on that as well. So that was the VR element as well with Elaine's work. Which brings me to the notion of the self and the body, as Ithell is used many a time as you see the work in the abstract and surreal forms of an arm, a breast, a leg, a thigh. We then go to Stacey Gillian Abi, and why I really resonated with this work in Ithell is, first of all, the potential of the female. And to question that in the 21st century, I really feel this is a platform that Ithell, her time is now. She's being celebrated in the canon as a female artist, but also Stacey Gillian Abi's work is a female artist that is almost question stereotypes of being a Black woman artist, and actually the fragility and strength of the mind. And the mind is really such an interesting area that we go into. And also there's a sense of colouring and ritual with Stacey's beautiful works, that we look at the sense of ritual, the colour, the blue. It's from she was telling me it's ritual, the paint back home that she has in Uganda. But actually the female self now, the empowerment of the female self. And again, that's that site of the body of transformation. So again, there's a very strong message and also connectivity between Ithell's work and this in this exhibition. Moving to Richard Malone's work as well. I also wanted to show the diversity of medium. I mean, we are in the 21st century, it's painting, it's photography, it's VR, it's very much a celebratory aspect, and performative, I think, is one thing that why I kind of lent to Richard's work, is that on the night Song of Songs, we had a fundraising evening for the charities Pieta House and Samaritans, and Richard very much has a joy. He's a fashion designer, but an artist that works very much in multidisciplinary. And the work that he showed, Ghost and the Relic of Ghosts, on that night was very much a joyful, I felt curatorially, almost like a ritualistic opening of the show, but opening of colour, of fabric, of abstraction, and of working with that playful sense of distortion and abstraction. So Ghost and Relic of Ghost are the sculptures that then sit, plus the evenings one, as relics within the exhibition. So we have this kind of knock-on effect of something performative that lives on, and lives on a very much abstracted geogeometric form, but crosses over diversity. We physically had a dance that night. So that was a really kind of interesting juxtaposition, and almost like a kind of performative aspect of bringing Ithell's work alive into the conversation. Moving then to the idea of the portrait, Richard had a great explanation of the self-representation. And to me, why I like Ithell's work, and Anna Wynant is why I led into her work, is the idea of the uncanny as well. That something, you know, Richard was saying that there was the portrait, the face which was cropped, and then the longer version. It's almost like the uncanny was in Ithel's work. In that self-portrait, the hands very crossed severely. There's an why did she crop it at that level? Just above the arms, the breast showing. It's quite interesting. It's almost like something's not quite right. It's kind of unsettling, and I think it's quite powerful. It doesn't show a demure woman or almost society's sense of what a portrait of a lady should be of a certain time. And societal views and shifting that lens is quite a clever concept. And Anna Wainwright is known for that, an American painter that actually has female and very disquieting or discomfortable or glamorous, so seemingly glamorous, but actually there's something not right. What is it in that picture and why? So that's why Anna Wainwright sits within that portraiture and that questioning and inquisitivity that I wanted to bring in that curatorial strand of the exhibition. So going on into that inquisitivity and unsettlingness, Jessie Moschran, another great American painter, and Jessie Moschran's work is based on Renaissance pieces or the notions of time or timelessness and power. And here we see a beautiful green squirrel with a kind of a man or woman, we don't know which gender, in some 18th century, 19th century costume that we cannot place. But what we don't figure much on that figure whose arms are very gestorial. We figure on, which could be male or female, we don't know. We figure on the squirrel that's been cropped to be in that picture plane perspective, center and forward. And that notion of the gold chain and that squirrel's eye. Who is in control? Who's master? And who is actually the follower? Who's the leader? Who's the follower? And it's the notion of desire. And desire, a surreal element of desire that I think Jessie Moschran, and she's known for cutting the picture plane. So the narrative shifts. There's a different sense of surreal narrative. There's a power, there's a vigor. And I think there's very much in line with Ithell Colguhoun's vigor and kind of drama within her works. So going from the drama to the spirituality, we have Suchitra Matai. And Suchitra was born in South America, but has very much a mix of mythology, religions, and transits. So this is Tree of Life, which we could relate directly back to some of Ithell's work on the notion of the tree of life, the mythology of life, the growth, the inspiration, enlightenment, or questioning of all those things. But this is a very beautiful tapestry work, again, showing mixed media in this exhibition, but it has this surreal element of a mishmash of languages, of culture, of religious, quasi-religious, of the notion, the gesturing of the hands, are we in Giotto, or gesturing of eras. So again, to me, it's a celebration of actually owning and creating a new vocabulary of surrealist language, of myth, of owning that power, and actually recreating as a female artist a language back, and using a notion of craftsmanship, which I think in the 21st century now, we're looking back at weavers, artists, and the narrative, which again, it's a new narrative that's being spun. Which takes us then to Claire Ormerod, an artist who very much has links to Ithell in many ways, but I want to talk about Claire's work, these abstract pieces which are inspired by the site, as she lives in Ireland, in the land of Huntington Castle, which has a strong history of Druidic tradition, Celtic enlightenment, ritual and procession. And these pieces are woven gold threads. And I said, how did you do this? Why these connect back to a spiritual element? And the artist said to me, well, she does the kind of stitching or the coloring in as a meditative state. So each time it's a meditation or a meditative state to enliven and enrich. And the work contains a message of collective identity, a message of collecting to the one, of the greater spirits of nature, of plants, of landscape. So Claire is inspired by the leaves, the plants, the bushes, the sights and sounds, and the meditation of Ireland and the landscape. Moving from the kind of landscape of nature to the digital terrain, we go on to Matthew Stone. So Matthew Stone's a British artist who very much started off as a painter, but the landscape that he owns and claims are much like Elaine Hui, is very much in the digital brushstroke, in the digital realm. And why Matthew is very important in this show is because he shows a terrain which takes the body and from that brushstroke becomes a digital brushstroke that exists within that picture plane perspective as we go forward and break new territory, a new domain, claiming of spaces. So dance is actually based on one of Ithell Colguhoun's work. You have to guess, Richard, that would be the brain teaser for the next book. It's based on one of Ithell's work. But very much there's a sense of the owning that space as celebratory, but it's the human form abstracted, but it also has gesture and it has a coded landscape within itself. So I find Matthew Stone's work brilliant to actually, again, carry on that baton as we engage in the 21st century. Moving now to furtherness into further digital and the terrain of science and the terrain of discovery. And I do think it's important to say that artists can be, well, female artists are embroiderers and painters, sculptors, but they also have a sense of subtlety, of science, of knowledge, of discovery, and devouring that and creating these amazing worlds. And Irish artist Grace Weir is exemplary in this. Her work in parallel is a video and is also a watercolor drawing, which Grace really shows the notion of time. We question time, our place in time, and actually time is not in a straight format. You can see here from the, I won't explain the video too much, but actually the experiment that Grace has done through time is that we see it's reciprocal in, it can be, it's not a straight line. So let's questioning our reality or modes of reality and modes of potential. And this can be done in a scientific realm, in a scientific world. And I do think that's a very interesting space to put alongside Ithell Colguhoun that did actually look at questioning that notion of where we sit within the surrealist notion of time and surrealist notion of other methodologies or other philosophies and religions. If then we go back from religion, coming back to the pure essence of the female form and the form itself, we look at Jessica Harrison. And to me, there's a massive celebration, and let's reclaim the female form and really push it out there. And I love Jessica Harrison's work, British artist based in Scotland, who very much, we have the Royal Dalton series in Britain that are beautiful, exquisite females, like I said before, very demure and has a sense of tradition within societal norms of how females should perform. Whereas Jessica really subverts that lens, again, that power play, and makes them gothic. The power is not on the figurine that you own and capture, that she's yours. I feel these figures could actually kill me or hunt me down. Some of them ripping hearts, heads off, sword chains, tattoos. They're very much a beautiful gothic ownership, but reclaiming that power back. And it's not a parody, it's actually more kind of questioning a narrative of why. So I do think Jessica Harris's work sits into that. And again, it's lovely to have ceramics. So we're kind of having a variety of media to celebrate the Song of Songs exhibition. I want to now take you to Bartika, who's a British artist based in Delhi. I've worked with Barti many times, and to me, she's very important too and pivotal in this exhibition. So we have the sculpture here, As Dangerous as an Albatross, because Barti's work is about exploring myth, exploring religion, exploring information and predictive of the future. So Barti's very much uses all these as a fact finder, and Barti's work will be predicting. I mean, I think she predicted a virus, which actually was my last show, but also a sense of going to temples, chopping up works, recreating, creating your own narrative and owning that narrative in a beautiful piece of found sculpture and having that surrealist edge and creating it in contemporary vocabulary that we understand. Barti's earlier pieces would be more domestic, of half woman's head with a wolf's head with like a vacuum cleaner holding a child, questioning females' role in society. Later pieces are larger sculptural work, drawing, so she's a sculptor, she's also polymath within her work. But ultimately there's an embracing and a celebration of, now we've got this sense of questioning where we are, what it is to be human, but we're changing that narrative and pushing that out there. So to me, it was really interesting to have her connecting to Ithell with all those elements on a global stage and a global connector to kind of re-question that history. So ultimately, as I kind of finish up on the Song of Songs with a contemporary artist before we go to questions to Richard, I would like to say all the artists in the exhibition celebrate what it means to be human, and that as a site of transformation. So to me, it's a show that I hope people have enjoyed, and actually then not only learned more about Ithell, but the contemporary artists here, as their work kind of has a portal into the unknown and a new space forward. So after that long run, I want now to go to Richard and put him on the hotspot, or not hotspot, and put a few questions, because obviously it's great to be in conversation. So thank you, Richard, again, for being in conversation tonight, very much representing Ithell Colguhoun. So I'd like to say, my first question, as mentioned, I mean, it's 2021. We've come out of COVID, we've come out of massive political upheaval. Society's changed and moved around, and it's a time of transformation as well. Do you think Ithell, who shows that in her work, is ahead of her time? And if she was or not, was she appreciated within her time?
It's a curious question in many ways. Was she ahead of her time? Because of course she didn't think time was linear. So are you ahead of oneself or not is a strange kind of question. I think most of her theoretical ideas and her view of her worldview was very much a retrospective one of looking back. Things like alchemy, things like animism, things like the casting of spells, understanding that the world was a place run by magical forces. These are very traditional, backward-looking ideas, which were largely superseded with the scientific Enlightenment. They got kind of not exactly disproved, but they became very profoundly unfashionable. But now we see that science has led us to a great deal of progress, but it's also led us to COP26 and the imminent destruction of the planet. And people are beginning, I think, to turn back to a more sympathetic view of our interactions with nature, not of dominating over nature and controlling it, but living in harmony with it. And that was very much the view that she espoused. If anyone reads her book about Cornwall, The Living Stones, you'll see that flowing right the way through, that this is a place of spiritual peace, of spiritual harmony, but we've become disengaged from all of that, and that we need to reattach ourselves to that. So I think her beliefs were profoundly unfashionable, and probably still are in certain ways, but people are coming now to see more the value of the non-rational side of life. Rationality has taken us to hydrogen bombs and deforestation and all the rest of it. It's time that we perhaps re-engaged with nature and took a more harmonious view of our place in it as being part of it rather than dominating it. And I think she would have found a lot of sympathy with some of the protest movements, the ecological movements that are going on today. Not that she was interested in practical day-to-day politics at all. She was much more bound up in her own inner preoccupations.
From those inner preoccupations, Richard, I know that we touched on lightly the sense of time and how she viewed time. Do you think, why was that important to her? Because I know we offline, we talked briefly about the kind of the dream analysis or time. Can you explain a bit more about that?
Well, it does relate to her views about dreams, because in dreams we access our own past. If you take the Freudian view, we can teach us about our past. And if you take the Jungian view, which she did, they can teach us about our collective past, about archetypes and collective unconscious and so on. And in a strange way, if you understand the past, that leads to being able to make predictions about the future, because our future is very much bound up with our own personal understanding of the past. But for her, she took it a stage beyond that, a stage which many people would not want to follow her in the contemporary world. That is, that dreams can predict the future. And of course, if you believe that time is linear, it's an arrow that shoots straight, you can't predict the future. But for most of recorded history, that's not the view that people have taken. And they felt that messages came from the gods, which ought to be obeyed, and often it led to complete disaster. But the dreams did contain instructions, advice, and information about what would happen. And for a number of years, she was a member of a research group led by a Jungian psychotherapist called Alice Buck. And they analysed their dreams, not in a verbal, rational way, but by making essentially automatic drawings. They called them smudges, but they were automatic drawings of their dreams. And they compared them to see if they had actually met up during the night in a shared unconscious place, a shared portion of the collective unconscious, or whether they could predict the future. Because occasionally things like something resembling the wing of a plane would emerge in someone's drawing, and they wondered whether this would indicate that we are about to have an aircraft tragedy. So they sincerely believed that you could predict the future. And it also tied in with a belief system that was quite common at the time, and I'm struggling now to remember what on earth it was. The idea of serial time, that's right. The time exists simultaneously on several different planes, and you can bridge between one or the other, so that the future is simply the present viewed from somewhere else. So
string theory.
Sorry?
Would that be string theory with some of that?
No, I don't think so. I'm not sure what string theory is. That sounds a bit like particle physics. No doubt someone can make a connection. Personally, my own neuronal connections won't allow me to, I'm sorry.
And from that connection, to me, lots of the artists like Linda Sterling, Jessie Moschran, look about the notion of the dynamics of the relationship and sexuality. Yes. And to me, obviously, Ithell's work has that. And is that more why maybe she's connecting more now, with contemporary society that could be non-binary, it's male and female, maybe it's the merging of the two, of Mother Earth? I mean, what's your view on sexuality generally with Ithell Colguhoun as a topic?
Well, it was absolutely central to her work. And you'll have noticed on a number of the paintings we looked at earlier that genitalia are present. And they're present in an awful lot of her work because she attached the appearance of gender differences in the Garden of Eden as a consequence of the fall, as a time when we had lost our spiritual innocence. And so one way of regaining our spiritual purity is to overcome gender differences and to make ourselves whole again. Now, whether that is asexual or whether that is bisexual or whether it is hermaphroditic or androgynous, it really is a matter of opinion, I think. But she wanted to supersede all these differences, and that she equated the return to the state of purity that existed before the fall with a state of spiritual enlightenment. And in that she was taking quite a common view of the nature of alchemy, which isn't necessarily to do with the transmutation of metals into gold, but the transmutation of ourselves into spiritual gold, into a spiritual harmonious self. And I think that's one of the reasons why she concentrates a lot on these on genitalia in her paintings. Have I got time to talk about why women are superior to men?
I was just going to ask, butt in there and say, on that note too, that artists, such as Barty, I suppose Linda, many of the artists actually, all of them there, even like Matthew Stone in some senses is kind of, I think, heralding or kind of looking at the notion of goddess and goddess worship, because as you know, she was made, I think, officially or unofficially a goddess at Huntington Castle. So to me, I think she is political in the sense that she became a goddess, it's empowerment. And do you feel, being a woman, that was her domain that she could claim and actually express herself and have a wider sensibility? Looking back through the lens of now, I know it's hard to kind of go back, but that's my reading. But I just wondered, what's your reading on it?
Well, I certainly think she felt that women had a much more harmonious relationship with nature than did men. And that's an idea that was current in occult thinking in France and in Germany in the 19th century, that women are, because of their maternal and their child-bearing abilities, were much more close to Mother Earth in the way that I was describing before. But she took this down some very strange pathways, again, ones which people will find very odd, but to her, although they were odd to an outsider, they were not at all odd to her. And whatever she did with utter seriousness and utter purity of intention. So the reason she gave for believing that women are more superior to men is because they have one more hole in their body, one more aperture. She wrote an essay called The Openings of the Body, in which she tries to count up the number of holes that exist in a human body. And she reckons, and you can do your own maths, that men have 12 and women have 13, if we exclude sebaceous glands and tear ducts and all the rest of it. So 12 is a pretty good number for a man. You can make linkages with the signs of the zodiac, but 13 is even better, because in Kabbalistic magic, there's a figure called Macroprosopus, the vast countenance, who's a kind of godlike figure, who has 13 strands in his beard, and his wisdom, his kindness, his beneficence flows down onto humanity through these 13 strands, and each strand of the beard can be linked magically to one or another of the aperture of the woman's body. And there's a painting by her which shows exactly this, the beard dripping oil to the woman's body.
And my final question, I mean, I do think now, Ithell, thanks to you as well as a great campaigner for her work, and this debate that we're talking about, she'll be placed in the British canon as one of the great British surrealists. She should be recognised, as we've gone through revisionist art history. We're looking at, political society through the lens of now, which is really exciting. And I think that debate of art and her place is inspirational. And to me, as you've been a great campaigner and supporter of Ithell's work, where does she sit with you? I mean, why did you start off on this journey? Was it out of curiosity, out of wonderment?
Initially, it's out of bewilderment, I think, really. I've always been interested in surrealism. And back in 1971, I saw a surrealist magazine which had some poems in it, which were completely incomprehensible. They didn't make any kind of sense at all. And there was this bizarre name at the bottom, which couldn't possibly be real, Ithell Colguhoun. But obviously I was completely wrong on all those counts, but it must have hit some kind of a nerve in me. And I made it my business to try and find out more about her. And shortly after I got married, my wife's parents lived in St Ives in Cornwall, which is not far from where she was then living. And we went into an art gallery in Penzance, looking for a painting by one of my wife's relatives. But we didn't find it. What we did find is a painting by Colquhoun. We found Alcove, which is in the exhibition, and so we bought that and we took that home. And so my interest in automatism was spurred on by that. My mother-in-law couldn't get the hang of automatism at all. She thought her daughter was making a big mistake in marrying me. But fortunately, nearly 50 years later, Alcove and I are still happily together. And so are her daughter and I. So it's all turned out well. So my life really was as a kind of scientist in the NHS. But you can't apply science to Colquhoun. You can't apply science to automatism. It's the antithesis of science. It's spontaneity. It's letting unconscious desires and urges take over and reign supreme. So it was the combination, it was that side of it which appealed to me in direct contradiction to my general life as a scientist. And she must have picked up something on that in me, because I met her once and she advised me to do automatic writing. So she clearly thought I needed to get in touch with my inner non-verbal self.
Well, thank you, Richard. That was really great to be in conversation with you. And I would like to thank all the artists that have shown tonight. That's Linda, Elaine Hui, Stacey Gillian Abi, Richard Malone, Anna Waynant, Jessie Moschran, Suchitra Matai, Claire Ormerod, Matthew Stone, Grace Weir, Jessica Harrison and Bartika. Thank you very much. Also thanks to Joe and Johnny, Katerina, Francis and Anna, but also Annie Lynett. And ultimately as well, thank you to Richard Shillitoe and also to the great Ithell Colguhoun. Thank you.